Please welcome to the stage MasterCard's Chief Data Officer, Andrew Reiskind, Writer AI's Chief Strategy Officer, Kevin Chung, Capital One's Chief Scientist and Head of Enterprise AI, Prem Natarajan, U.S. Bank's Chief Product Officer for the Business Banking Segment, Shruti Patel, with moderator Caroline Daniel, partner of the Brunswick Group.
Good morning, everyone. I think this is a great panel. I'm a former journalist, and I think the word hype is something that is a common theme in the media around AI. And in fact, if you just look at the media every single day, CNN headline last week saying AI is hitting a wall just as the hype around it hits the stratosphere. MIT Tech Review has just launched its own AI hype monitor, an index summarizing everything you need to know and not know about the hype around AI. And Gartner has just done a report looking at its own hype cycle index for AI. So hype is everywhere in the sector, so I think it's great that we're going to be rooted in this panel in what's actually happening in reality. So I'm going to start with Prem. I think one thing you were just saying backstage is actually the hype is in not so much the necessary use cases, but actually the underhyped thing is which isn't focused on enough is how you get there. How do you actually get to the use cases? So let's kick off with that.
Yeah, Caroline and I were talking about how this is going to kick off, and I said the unhyped part is actually not the use cases, because the use cases are the ones that get the most hype. The unhyped part is what gets you ready to deploy any use case that you want. And that journey in my mind starts like a few years earlier. Where are you in terms of your tech stack? Where are you in terms of the readiness of your data, both in terms of the volumes of data and the quality of the data, the completeness of the data? Where are you in terms of your willingness to both pay for the talent and the culture that you have organizationally that allows that talent to want to come in and flourish and make the things that you want to make happen? And so just speaking to Capital One's history, I think one of the decisions, and this is way before I joined, to go all in on the cloud. Capital One is all in on a single public cloud, which is not as risky as it might sound, because every single public cloud is geographically resilient worldwide, and so you get all the geo-resilience that you want and all kinds of other things. But that also made us cloud natives in terms of our development stack. And once you're cloud native and all of your data, we have no data centers. All of our data is on the cloud. It's right next to the most massive repository of compute there is in the world. And so you're able to exercise that compute more efficiently. So then that leaves you with the talent thing. And Capital One's history of like having invested in AI ML over time, and then we kind of bolstered it with bringing in deep learning expertise and Gen AI expertise, et cetera, to build it in. On the use cases side, if I may, a lot of the hype comes around what can't be done. And most of us would agree those things are probably too early to be done, whether it's the credit use cases, where there's so much regulatory compliance and also laws to be complied with, et cetera. But there are just so many other use cases in people's everyday lives, the kinds of reports people have to generate, or the kinds of even fraud detection, et cetera, where it's not necessarily Gen AI, but the same underlying deep learning technology, transformers, et cetera, that can leverage massive amounts of data that you have to deliver value to the customers. So I think the unhyped part is where a lot of the leverage and the payoffs is right now, both in terms of the investments you've made and in terms of what you're doing, focused on.
Shruti, the same question for you. I mean, do you want to start with the use cases in terms of what's unhyped or the tech stack behind them?
We can talk about the use cases because I think Prem touched upon a lot of what really needs to happen from a tech stack perspective before you're even ready. So I lead business banking at US Bank, and I will say most of my unhyped use cases are very non-glamorous. We operate at millions of customers, billions of money movement on a regular basis. And so we have to look at some of the complexity, the regulations, the inherent risk, and make sure that we have the right framework and usage control. And so, some of the very simple things we're looking at, because banks constantly get judged on their efficiency ratios. and we need to be very capital efficient. And so there are some really capital intensive operations. Think about customer support, think about fraud, real-time AML, fraud detection, think about credit underwriting. We want to do it at a faster scale, at a higher frequency, higher accuracy, and these are also very human-centric, human-heavy businesses. And so we are very much focused on a bunch of just looking at solving very core process pain points. And these are not necessarily pain points as much as this is how do you do it better, improve the customer experience at a much larger or greater speed, but with more accuracy, and then in turn continue to drive bottom line efficiency. We have a merchant acquiring solution, and a lot of our small businesses actually use our point of sale. And we realize that for small businesses, point-of-sale solutions sometimes can be very daunting because they're looking at these softwares and they're trying to figure out how do they actually think about inventory management, email marketing. And so even releasing as simple as a smart assistant to help them with, hey, think about invoicing, or go here and click on this button and we can generate a CRM report for you. So those are some of the very unhyped use cases we're looking at from a bank perspective.
Andrew, when we spoke last week, I think the question you most wanted to be asked was what are some of the coolest and most innovative AI use cases in banking that you're seeing at the moment? So I'm going to kick that over to you.
Sure. So I would say a lot of the use cases are being hyped, right? We hear a lot about customer service. I mean, we launched one of those 2 weeks ago or so. We have a tool in retail. Those are the things that are getting the press releases. But I would say it is very much worthwhile to talk about the things that aren't getting the press releases, because actually Teresa, in her conversation, started talking about that. So if anybody's had the experience of walking halfway through a meeting and being able to ask the chatbot, because the chatbot actually offers it during our meetings, hey, do you want a summary of what's gone on in this meeting up till now? OMG, it is the greatest experience. I would actually suggest that all of you experience it. It may actually get us into really bad behaviors of walking halfway into meetings, because now you can just rely on the chatbot to give you the summary. So I would just say that is an easy example of where those unhyped use cases are that we are experiencing as we are using it. Because as Teresa had pointed out earlier, it is all about our using it, getting comfortable with it, that we're getting to see it. Because we're seeing it today that our employees have access to the tools now, and they're going forth and experimenting to see how it makes their lives easier. Yes, is it all unstructured? Yes. Is it production ready? No. But it's making their lives easier. It's making them happier. It's making them more effective. As Shruti just said, it's all about employee efficiency. Give them the tools. They will figure it out. They are smart people. Yes, they do need education, but they're all well-motivated because they want to get rid of the boring stuff in their jobs. They want to do the exciting stuff. So that's the stuff I'd like to hype, is the stuff that makes our employees excited, that gets them energized to come to work, that they can focus on the important and exciting things and not just worry about mundane tasks like, oh, I have to summarize the latest PowerPoint.
There's basically unhyped use cases, some of the boring use cases.
Yes.
Over to you, Kevin.
So I would say, I have a different lens on the whole ecosystem because we're a technology provider, and so we work with hundreds of enterprises and many in the financial institution industry. And so one thing that's been, everything that we see is unhyped and actually in production. So we run tens of thousands of in-production use cases, and some of the things that have been really astounding. So Teresa mentioned it, Andrew mentioned it, like things like summarization, right? Being able to write an email. Those are things that everybody's able to have access to and use. But there's so many innovative use cases that the customers are bringing to us, which is why I love partnering with the customers. Because for one, they might say, okay, great, I want to do this thing. It's going to make my life easier. But I had a bank that I was talking to in Southeast Asia that was like, look, I need to do supply chain financing, right? I need to figure out how to do this for the hundreds of thousands of small businesses that reach out about understanding the vendors. How do I pay them? What happens if a vendor goes down and I need to figure out a replacement? How does that impact my business? They're all using AI to do that now, right? And so those are just some really interesting things that are happening now. And then there's other things where, a lot of this is just around actually getting the information out, right? So we've all talked about news moves pretty fast. But sometimes it takes us a long time to write the content, to make sure it's approved. It goes through brand review, legal review. It's got to go through 10 different reviews. How can we augment that? And what's great about what AI is doing today is it actually can ingest all the knowledge of your organization and be able to allow you to process it. So something that takes 3 days can now be done in seconds. So a lot of these use cases are being driven by organizations. And what I love seeing is actually the customers are bringing to us what they want to see. And then we leverage the platform to do it. And so in my case, 100% of the use cases are all unhyped and they're all in production. So I like being on that side of the house, but less so on the experimental side.
Coming back to some of the practicalities we heard this morning about how far a lot of the value-adding AI use cases are actually from what I hate to call traditional AI. I think we need to come up with better framing for traditional AI than traditional AI, because it's not just traditional AI. Compare with the sort of generative AI applications. Perhaps you can both talk to that about where you're seeing the most value-adding examples.
Look, maybe the one unhyped part here, Caroline, is that AI or statistical machine learning, we now call everything. It's interesting. I've gone through life in the AI world where in the late 90s and early 2000s, we went out of our way to say we don't do AI, we do machine learning, because AI was considered like the kind of thing you did to fall into disrepute. And then, since then, there's been a whole revolution where everything is now AI. So I think if you look at there's a progression of techniques, right? The statistical machine learning, and then more complex versions of it, and then neural networks, and then deep learning, and things like that. And so on that continuum, AI and machine learning, most of the forward tech-leaning enterprises, whether it's in finance or elsewhere, have been leveraging all of this. It's present in our lives far more than we realize. The unhyped part is actually the last 10 years, perhaps, of how much AI and ML have actually part of our lives every single day. You can pick at random any experience that you have, and almost certainly there's some amount of machine learning or AI in today's parlance. For now, though, I think the unhyped parts are where you're working back from the end customer's needs. And in order to serve the customer well, whether they're your internal users or your external customers, your AI solutions have to be grounded in the data that represents their experiences. So what you're trying to improve are their experiences. And so unless your AI enterprise is able to leverage your proprietary data to create proprietary solutions that deliver value, this is the other part. Kevin and Andrew were talking about the horizontal aspects of it, the software thing or the report writing stuff that might be horizontal things. But most of the business leverage will come from where you have your proprietary data that allows you to create AI, deliver solutions, make a difference to customers in their everyday lives now.
And Shruti, if you look at sort of use cases being deployed at the bank at the moment, which is adding the most value at the moment, what would they be?
I think real-time detection of fraud and AML continues to be very top of mind for us. The second one, I think, is around product recommendation. So I think Andrew maybe touched on this. All banks, all financial institutions have both physical distribution and they're omni-channel, but people still love going to the branches. That's why the top 10 banks continue to invest in more branches. And one of the things we are looking at is how do we drive banker efficiencies? Our bankers are in the branches. When small businesses come into one, when customers come into one, how do we make them really enabled to give them wealth advice, running their businesses, product recommendations, ensuring the quality of service is really good, right? And so you could do it through, obviously, the very non-traditional methods like enablement, education, awareness, but that only drives a certain level of efficiency till you reach or cap that human potential. But think about they're in front of a system and you have a product recommender tool, something like an assistant or a help desk, which is essentially telling them to ask 5 or 6 very relevant questions based on what you can then predict a good product recommendation for the customer. So we're looking both internally and externally. Anti-money laundering is very top of mind for all banks. I was just reading something this morning by one of my favorite authors, and he said there are 2 things the banks are actually most worried about going into next year. It's AML, and second is the quality of credit risk. It's going to suffer as we go into this very volatile economy and environment. And so I'm sure those will surface as the top two, but also thinking about just employee satisfaction, getting them to be more efficient, more productive, like banker tools, is very top of mind for us.
And Andrew, building on sort of that idea of different kind of tools, and one thing you've been looking at is conversational commerce, and actually having a good use case around generative AI in deployment.
Yeah, so we had launched a tool called Shopping Muse that leverages Gen AI, and it's actually a very nice contained use case because it is very much based upon a retailer's inventory, and so the outputs of the chatbot are going to either be text about a retailer's inventory or images of a retailer's inventory. And so that got us to the recommendation engines for products, Rudy, right? We're not the retailer, but we support the retailers enabling to do that. So that side of the equation, we are already trying to move forward pretty quickly. I would say, as many would acknowledge, though, there are going to be limitations right now relative to the safety and soundness of the chatbots to how broadly can you push it. But I think we're all in the stage of pushing the envelope there and seeing how we can get. So I've seen examples where, in beta phases, where you get your phone to scan your invoice or you scan your bill as a consumer, and the chatbot automatically figures out, okay, this is the bill, this is who I'm paying, and therefore now take it out of my demand deposit account, my checking account, and pay them on the date that the bill is due. Right? All within the context of a chatbot window and enabling that. So I've seen that as a beta. And so personally, I think that, again, as a consumer, I think that is totally fantastic. I can't wait till that's really production ready. But a lot of this stuff is still early stages, right? This is where, how comfortable are we with them? Is it going to get it right? Like we've seen in many cases, right, these ACH payment tools, I'll just label it that way instead of naming names, have been called on the hill for the fraud that has been enabled through them. And so safety and security still has to come first as we're doing this. But we also want to make that really exciting consumer experience. So we are looking at trying to enable those kinds of exciting consumer experiences.
But what are banks not paying enough attention to, Andrew, in terms of the unhyped use cases?
I would say, you know, listening to Teresa, they are being much more mindful, right? Because as financial institutions, all of us, our trade currency really is trust, right? As opposed to if you look at a lot of other industries, those industries are pushing the envelope a lot faster because they're less worried about trust, right? If the chatbot goes sideways for one of them, it's not as a big of an issue as, if it starts pulling money out of my checking account, yeah, there might be a regulatory complaint coming as a result of that. But that's not going to be the case, well, if it gives me wrong directions as how to get to a store. So I would just say, I don't know that the banks aren't thinking enough. It's just they're coming across as more cautious. But that caution is well-deserved, right, in our industry because of that trust issue.
Kevin, again, you're sort of slightly outside the sector. What are you thinking that banks aren't paying enough attention to?
I mean, you know, I would honestly say that the banks are some of the most innovative industry companies that I've talked to around AI, which I was actually surprised to me because when I came in, looked at regulated industries, I was like, I don't think the financial institutions want to do this, and it was the exact opposite. So there's a lot that's being done. What I would say is it's probably, and as being the provider, they need to do more. They need to do more faster. I think we need to do hundreds to thousands of augmented AI workflows, right? And so, you know, having seen a number of different industry technology trends, I was, there when we were doing digital payments before people were actually paying with their phones. I was working on cloud storage before people were putting things in the cloud, and I was working on, digital whiteboards before people were actually doing anything. Everything was manual. So one of the things that I've noticed is that there was a lot of hesitation about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, around adoption, and so now it's completely flipped. Everybody's like, we got to do this. My only advice to the banks are do it faster, do more of it, because right now, all the conversation is less about, am I going to be behind? You're at a competitive advantage if you're not doing this, because almost every customer I talk to is like, we want to do this thing. Well, there's already about 4 or 5 of your competitors that are doing the same thing. So from my lens of it is always like, do more, but that's obviously in my self-serving interest. But certainly, there are certainly things that are going to be huge game changers for productivity, for consumers, for the bankers, for everybody involved. So I think that's where we're at today, is just really how do we drive that ecosystem and do more of it?
When you say huge game changers for productivity, that's pretty compelling to this room.
Yeah.
What's a good example of that?
So there's some things that can be measurable and there's some things that aren't. So I'll tell you the ones that are highly measurable. I mean, Andrew and the team have been talking about this, which is there's all the productivity, right? So I always call it superpowers, right? Like we're trying to give our employees superpowers, right? So how do we give them superpowers to do more in their day? I'm using AI to do, 10 times more things than I used to. All the BS work that I want to do, I'm giving that to the AI, right? And so that's what we should be doing and building, sort of applications for that. But there are also things, I would say, there's clearly cost savings and other things you can find, but I think there are actually things that are, you can't even measurably put value on this. And one thing in particular that AI is great about doing is, particularly like companies who have large employee bases, imagine trying to manage people's communication, right? It's like, they don't speak like organizations that are using the wrong terminology. They're getting us in trouble, legal trouble, because they're saying, I'm going to guarantee this, I'm going to commit this. So AI now can actually really help provide guardrails around that, right? So being able to provide, these are the things you can say. These are approved comms. And then now you don't actually have to go through 10 people to get things approved. The AI can actually help you do that. And we had one client who did this actually that was, I think they were saying this was sort of an immeasurable value to them, which is, a crisis happened, they needed to communicate with their customers right away. And every second that they weren't communicating, the customers were calling in, they were freaking out, and they were just like, we need to get approved comms out right away. Usually that process would take them like 3 days. They have to write it, they have to get it approved. They were able to do it in 15 minutes and then send it out, right? So the ability to do that is like, you can't even put a value on just the brand consistency, but on top of that, just being able to extract your message and have like hundreds of thousands of people in your organization speaking the way you want them to speak around this is just invaluable.
I want to come to reality about how you think about what's happening now in the world in terms of analyzing use cases in the banks versus 18 months ago, and some of the changes in terms of what you're able to look at now, which is sort of deployed at scale in terms of regular use cases.
Callan, before moving to that, I do want to address this thing about the purpose of AI and the productivity gain, because I think a focus on productivity misses the real transformation that's happening. It's not really just productivity or even its measurability like you were talking about. First, I think one of the noble aims of AI is to transfer the cognitive burden from the human to the system. And think about what it means to be in a regulated industry. It means that there are lots of processes which require a lot of attention to detail, which means a lot of cognitive burden on a large workforce, right? So if you can't harness the power of AI to transfer the cognitive burden from your workforce and from your customers to your system, you've kind of failed at your mission of harnessing the real power of AI. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the quality. Productivity is one thing, but it's not, humans are not just productivity limited. It's also quality limited. There are certain tasks, especially in terms of aggregating massive amounts of information, paying attention to all of the salient details in all of that massive amounts of information, producing reports that are complete. These are all inherently demanding tasks, right? AI can help improve all of that. So the quality of yours. Third, you can meet your customers where they are, when they are, in the way they want to be met, right? That's a customer service transformation, which is not just about saving the cost with which you can serve a customer, but massively improving the quality of the service that you're giving to the customer. So I'd say if you take a look at all of these and say, this is my framework. Now I want to go find where are the use cases that unlock maximum value for you. Then your focus shifts away from like the specific use cases to creating a platform strategy that allows your entire company to go find the use cases they all want to develop and deploy. So to me, the unhyped part of it is also the platformization investment that you have to make. Because if there is the notion that you're going to develop all of these use cases in a central way and deploy them out there, you've kind of missed the boat too, because you really have to create platforms. Second, if you've created platforms and people can create these applications, how do they test and benchmark these applications? If they can't test and benchmark these applications, there's no way for them to make sure that they're delivering value or that it's increasing value. Third, I think deployment is really the first step on the AI stairway to heaven, right? And so that's the first step. Most of the improvement comes post-deployment. How do you monitor? What are your observability practices? How can you instrument it so that you're measuring quality on an ongoing basis, how you're bringing back all of that data. It's okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to make the same mistake again and again. So are you learning from the mistakes that the AI makes? Because it will make mistakes. So to me, I think those are the things. On the use cases, customer servicing, of course, is a huge use case. Most of us are investing in it. Fraud is a huge use case. Software development, et cetera. And any analogs you have of software development, which is knowledge assistance for your workforce, for your developer workforce, for your big knowledge workforce, et cetera. All of these are use cases, but I really think the hype is the focus on the use cases and not on what's required to enable them to be practiced at scale.
But isn't it hard to actually assess platform-wide, if you're trying to create a whole platform versus a use case, how do you actually get the right structural thinking in your organization to work out what's good? It's quite easy to look at a use case and say what's the outcome, what's the ROI. So where your thing is much more sophisticated about the multiple ways you should be thinking about.
If you look at a single use case, the long arc, and I know Shruti would want to jump in, so I'll just make a very quick point. I think the long arc of AI, unlocking the value of AI, bends towards centralization. If you keep taking the view of siloed development of use cases, you're also missing the point, right? Because all of these things are about a collective learning that keeps improving a lot of these processes at the same time. This is a multi-year journey. If you're trying to unlock value in 6 months, then you'll unlock a certain amount of value in 6 months, and then you'll find yourself capped, right? So I give it to you, Shruti, because we're running out of time, but there's much more to be said on this, yeah.
No, I think Prem hit on all of the right points. I don't think anything was missed. I would just say a couple of things, to your earlier question, Caroline, which is around platform. I agree you don't want to do the siloed use cases, and not everyone is at a journey on their data, their cloud, where suddenly they're going to build a platform, right? The sophisticated financial institutions are doing it. But I think there's something about customer journeys, and you have to map out your customer journeys across your different segments, and particularly in banks. You have such diversified asset sets and such diversified segments that they all have very different needs. But I bet when you start looking at end-to-end customer journeys, there are certain use cases which just pop, which are actually segment-wide, and that's where the horizontal platformization comes in, right? You build a platform which is going to spit out product recommendation, and it doesn't matter who the customer is. It's agnostic because you have a limited set of products, and you're trying to make sure that you're capping on that human potential, essentially. So I think customer journey mapping is really important, specifically for large-scale institutions, because otherwise it's very easy to get lost in siloed use cases, and the tech stack just doesn't support that, right? Like you have these huge monoliths. Finally, you're moving to cloud, and you're working on a data strategy, and so that's why that horizontal platforms work. And I just want to touch upon one other thing, about deployment and scale, because I think Kevin brought it up. We need to do it faster. Yes, we definitely, need to do it faster. But there are also, outside of regulation, banks also have this other burden about social inclusion, social benefit, causing no harm, being fair, being transparent, explainability. These are some really high criteria to take into account, and that's where the constant iteration of your models come in, the constant iteration of your technology comes in. Because the last thing you want is a credit underwriting machine learning model breaking down and saying no to an entire segment of population because of how you built it based on proprietary data. And so I think a lot of that needs to be taken into consideration when you're deploying at scale. And that's, I think, one of the inherent risks in what the banks are battling with.
Last questions on your side. So Andrew, quick one for you is what's next in terms of the unhyped use cases of the future? And then I have a final question, which I want to end on for Kevin.
I think what's next, I'm hopeful I will be surprised. I will put it that way, right? In the sense of the employees on a regular basis are creating new tools and new capabilities, right? So one of the areas of focus is using generative AI to actually support democratizing analytics and democratizing access to data. And I don't know what that's going to look like, right? In my worldview, I want to kill every dashboard that pre-exists, right? And instead just have a chatbot available to a business person to answer business questions, because that's really the point of it. But what does that look like, Carolyn? I don't know. I hope to be pleasantly surprised.
Just to put some completely different on the agenda,
Yeah.
Kevin, in terms of what's coming next from you guys, it's something I've never read about, which is self-evolved LLMs. So
Yes.
just in the last 20 seconds
Yeah. We're always about pushing the envelope on innovation, right? Like the LLMs are not the end-all be-all, right? Like we prescribe to a full stack, which means like you have to have all the components working together. LLMs are just part of it. But the key thing about a self-evolving LLM is you think about all this money that's being poured into LLM and model training, right? But those only get updated over a certain period of time. It's only like the information and knowledge it has is up to a certain date and time. But now that we've developed a way for the model to actually continue to self-evolve and self-train. So what you can imagine is, as it's learning from what you're doing in an organization, the model itself can become more efficient, right? The efficiency then passes back to the end user and the customer, who's able to then produce use cases at faster scale, right? Lower cost. And so an example of that would be, as you're using it in like a financial institution, like understanding the trends of the market, right? Like understanding the real-time data of what's happening in the market, and the model itself is updating itself in real time. So you don't have to update the models every 3 months, every 6 months. It's actually in real time happening. So that's some of the fun stuff that we, in our playground, are messing around with. But ultimately, that's what's going to happen. Like at the end of the day, we're all here to build a business. We can't, build and work on models that are going to cost us more money than we're actually generating returns. And so our whole thing is around generating ROI. And we think the self-evolving models is going to be the future of models.
Great. Well, I'm not quite sure how to summarize that panel. I think we've jumped from crisis comms in 15 minutes rather than 3 days. The fact that use cases aren't the thing to be focusing on, it should be focusing on platforms. The death of dashboards, which I'm completely in tune with. And you've heard it here for self-evolved LLMs, which will overtake the next generation of LLMs. So perhaps we'll have a panel on that next year. Yep. Those are the new use cases. So thank you very much to the panel. There is going to be coffee now in a 10-minute, 15-minute break. So feel free to go and grab some coffee. But in the meantime, please thank the panel.
Thank you all.
Good to hang out.